Let's take a look at the brand new CBS Sports 130, shall we? The top three remain the same, but Cincinnati really struggled with now 1-6 Navy, and they've lost some ground at number 2 to fast-charging Alabama, who comes in at number 3 once again. Of course, everybody's still chasing Georgia. The Bulldogs, the number 1 team in the land. Let's look at how the top 10 shakes out this week. Ohio State jumps Oklahoma, so the Buckeyes are into the 4 position, OU at 5 after struggling with Kansas. And Wake Forest is into the top 10. Even if I say they're ranked 8th at some point during this show, just remember Wake Forest is 9th in the CBS Sports 130. Chip Patterson joins us from the Cover 3 podcast. Chip helps put together our CBS Sports 130, one of the many votes from our college football experts. Let's start with the battle for number 2, because we all know Georgia right now has to be number 1. How close was Alabama from jumping Cincinnati for number 2 in our poll?
7 points close. I mean, the 27-20 result against Navy shows just how fragile all of the goodwill that Cincinnati has earned with those big wins against Notre Dame, Indiana, and then putting a couple 50 burgers on the spot against some of the teams at the bottom of the conference. But just to see how even a close call, remaining undefeated, is going to put that number 2 spot on the line. You mentioned it was a slow start for Alabama, but I think our voters are taking a big picture look at the Crimson Tide, considering that Texas A&M was a real wake-up call and that they, as Nick Saban has said, are just now starting to find their identity. So if you think that Alabama is playing some of the best football, if Bryce Young doesn't look scared to take off and make plays with his feet anymore, we're seeing them be a little bit better defending against the run on a really consistent basis. I think that as Alabama continues to get better, if it is a team that is playing its best football, we could see Alabama overtake Cincinnati for that number 2 spot. The only thing the Bearcats can do is not only continue to win, but yes, we are going to be talking about style points, and 27-20 is just not going to cut it.
Georgia, Cincy, Alabama, 1, 2, 3. Let's move to Oklahoma. They dropped just 1 spot in our poll from 4 to 5, despite really screwing around with Kansas. And they almost, I know they won by 12 eventually, but they were close to losing that game. Are there more doubts now about this team? Caleb Williams, such a great story, and he did win that game with some big plays down the stretch. But are there more doubts about him after this one?
Absolutely. And that's why it is interesting that Oklahoma, 8-0, undefeated, is not being mentioned in the same breath as an Alabama or an Ohio State as the teams that we really consider a threat to Georgia in the college football playoff, even though the kind of offense with Caleb Williams when he's playing at his best might be what you need to be able to keep that terrifying Georgia defensive front at bay. But just the quality of play from the Sooners against Kansas as a 38.5-point favorite, it's just tough to be able to win those tie-breaking arguments when you start to compare them against an Ohio State, against an Alabama, and even against a Cincinnati, because that was a Cincinnati Navy result and an Oklahoma Kansas result. Those are spots where this is all subjective. You're going to end up losing ground in the rankings.
20-point favorite this weekend, though, at home against Texas Tech, a team that's going to be firing their head coach very soon. How about Wake Forest? Unbeaten, they hang 70 on Army. They're now up to number 8 in the CBS Sports 130. But, Chip, the defense, look, they've given up 34-plus in each of their last 3 games. Is that defense eventually going to be their downfall?
It's absolutely, yes. Like Wake Forest, when it loses a game, as I expect at some point this season, and there are some really, really tough games coming down the stretch, the defense will be what we point to, because the offense operates at one of the most efficient levels in the entire country. They did not punt once against Army. Every single drive was either a touchdown or a turnover on downs, and one drive that ended the half. I mean, it is ruthless the way that Sam Hartman can pick you apart. He's got Jakari Robinson and A.T. Perry. Those are his top 2 backs. Christian Beal-Smith, Turner gets it going in the run game. And it is something that is a little bit of a schematic advantage where we need to credit Dave Clawson. And one of the reasons why I mentioned Dave Clawson when we have these Coach of the Year type conversations, because if you watch a Wake Forest game, it'll almost give you anxiety because the quarterback holds the mesh point. He stuffs the ball into his running back's belly, and they hold it for seemingly forever. It freezes the defense. It allows for big plays over top. And you need to have a disciplined offensive line to run that without getting ineligible linemen downfield penalties all game. And that's exactly what Wake Forest has, an experienced group with 22, 23, 24-year-olds that are exploiting a loophole in the offensive rules for big gains in college football.
They still have to go to Clemson this season, but the Tigers lost their third game this past week. How far did they plummet?
They are just an average Power 5 team, and I think it is very tough for us to wrap our minds around the idea that we're probably staring at a 7-5 Clemson playing in the Belk Bowl instead of a 13-0 Clemson trying to prove itself in the college football playoff. They've been to 6 straight college football playoffs. They've won 6 straight ACC championships. And now, especially after this loss to Pitt, it's looking like all of those streaks are going to come to an end. So we've got to figure out what to do with Clemson, but I see them as a very middle-of-the-road Power 5 team.
All right, Chip Patterson with us here on CBS Sports HQ, part of the Cover 3 podcast. Check it out today. You can find, by the way, the entire CBS Sports 130 on CBSSports.com.